Alright, I think we're just about ready to go here. Let's hit the button. What's up, everybody? How's it going?
Hey
Cheers.
guys.
Who do we got here? Who's in the chat? We've got Darren Large, spam and time energy emojis. Good to see ya. Akbar. Good to see you as well. Who else is here? Folks, we got, what, 8 people in here right now? Let's get it going, huh? Right now would be the time to take the link to this stream and paste it into other places on the internet and say, we're going to be talking about whether Obama was the worst president ever, or if it's Trump. Now, of course, depending on who your social medias go out to, I could imagine some of you might not want to put it that way. Some of you might want to put it a different way. Figure out how you want to put it and get it out there. I never really encourage people to kind of share out on their socials, but I think maybe we should make a little bit more of a habit of it. Yeah? Here, I'll tag you on X, Benjamin, so you can do it too. Let's see.
Oh yeah.
All right, I tagged you. Yeah. If you're in the chat right now and you are already done sharing this out across socials, and now you're just sitting there drinking your coffee or what have you, welcome. Great to have you. We're about to create a little poll for folks so that you can let us know something. But in the chat, you could type out for us all, what time is it where you are located? I am curious, everybody. What time is it? I like to see all those time zones. Everybody's got a different time of day. Is it morning? Is it afternoon? Is it evening? Let us know in the chat. Obviously, we're not recording for this episode of Why Left. We'll begin that momentarily. We're just getting this out across the socials. I'm sharing this to the Theory Underground Patreon. I'm sharing it to the Theory Underground Discord, you know, all that kind of thing. Also, I think some people, everyone who's a real subscriber at Theory Underground should have just got an email from us like just a little bit ago. And so, yeah, we'll have some people clicking into this from there. All right, it's noon for Weird Solowski. Sounds like you're in Central Time. Pavel Olstein says, let it snow something. Yeah, it's snowing a lot in North Idaho. We just came down from there. There's a lot of snow compared to Boise. Galen, good to see you, man. How you doing? Still haven't responded to your email because I don't even know what it says. I haven't been able to look at, man, email is just killing me. I'm behind. We'll just leave it at that. Darren
Stuff
said
out
12.
there.
It is. Darren said 12:15 in the PM here, Central Time in Chicago, where it is very cold and sunny. Hunter said, I'm in Pacific Time, I think. 10. DX1all33 says, is the president who implements a bad new policy worse than the one who cements that policy by continuing it? Let's address that one once we're actually going. That's a great one. That's a really good question. Grains says it's 12:16 here in SATX. Spencer says, woo. Very good freelancer says, wow, Idaho accent. I never thought about that. I do have an Idaho accent. Ruiz is in Florida. What's up, Ruiz? Good to see you, man. All right, everybody. That's probably enough. Now, how are we going to make this poll, Benjamin? What do we want to ask people?
Well, we
Definitely
want to
want to get...
ask them if they touched that like button yet, if they grazed it with their fingers.
Did you touch that like button yet? Did you raise it with your fingers? Yes. and Obama is the worst president. And then I'm going to have another that says yes, but Trump is the worst president. And then we'll have another one that says, how does this one go? Editing one of your...
No, no, and Obama, no, and Trump, and then no, go to hell.
No, and Obama, and no. Wait, so wait. No, and Obama, and Trump?
Wait, can we do more than three or just three?
We could do four.
Okay. All right. So then no Obama, no Trump. So that there are two options for the no's.
Okay,
Then if we
perfect.
could do a fifth, then something like go to hell.
Okay. No, I have I
Yeah.
have I have yes, and Obama is the worst president. Yes, but Trump is the worst president. No, Obama, go to hell. No, Trump, go to hell. And it doesn't let me do a fifth, so we'll just send
Okay.
it off.
All right. So
All right.
that'll do.
That should stir the pot with the algo a little bit, everybody. Yeah, just enough. Not too much. We don't want to burn our hands on the algorithm, but we'll warm them up a little bit. You know, just a little bit. All right. We've got 30 people here. I think we're probably good to go. So I'm going to hit the record button and we'll kick this thing off. Yeah. So
All right.
3, 2. Hey, and but once we get going, just like I really want to like lead off with the reading of this one message, the one we started this talking about. All right.
Yeah, I'll let you explain where it's
Okay.
gone.
Sweet. All right. 3, 2, 1.
Hi, I'm Benjamin Studebaker.
And this is David McCarricker. You're listening to Why Left. So today we're going to be talking about whether or not Obama was the worst president ever. And the reason we're going to be talking about this is because a progressive leftist in our lives, or at least in my life, made a very interesting Facebook post, which I will proceed to read aloud. So we've got this interesting photo up for the people who are watching it live. It's got Obama. I mean, how would you describe this image? What are we looking at here?
Obama, but with different kinds of coding. Obama coding feminine, Obama coding masculine, Obama coding different races, different ethnicities, Obama in different styles, different aesthetics of Obama, shades of Obama, perhaps.
The many shades of Obama, which, I mean, I think some people could be very offended by some of these because in one of them, he looks like, I don't know, Catherine Liu. And in another one, he looks like he's supposed to be a Native American. So I don't know what is going on with the image, but this was
He looks a
shared.
little bit like a Chinese emperor wearing all of the different costumes of the different population groups in the Chinese Empire. They used to do this. They would depict the Chinese emperor in the
Oh,
clothing of all of the different population groups so that they could suggest in some way that he belongs to all of them.
that's awesome, actually. I didn't know about that. Yeah. We should do that. You and I should do that. We should dress up as all the people who are involved at TU so that they can all feel recognized, which is, I think, your new goal in life, right, Benjamin? Oh, and there's one that's actually, we didn't scroll down. There's also like a Jewish one, an Arab one, and one is just straight up Jesus. So Obama Jesus. But anyway, what is all this? What I know that some people listening to this are tuning in because the title of the stream is not just Obama or Trump, which president was worse. It's also Message to Democrats Part 3. This is the third of this series that we're doing, obviously, because Democrats are not having the best times of their lives. And we love our Democrats, and so we try to share a little perspective from either leftist or post-leftist kind of position. And so Mohammed Salemi is the organizer of the new Center of Research and Practice, or New Center for Research and Practice. That's center spelled with a C-E-N-T-R-E. It's like the European spelling, I think. And the New Center for Research and Practice does a really important work. It's a place for academics to accelerate their careers and their research by doing seminars, and it's very cool. They've got like a smorgasbord of like special research topics that they get into. In my experience, it was a little too conversational for me, and I really wanted lectures because I was a multitasking worker with disposable time, but I didn't want to listen to conversations or seminars. I wanted to listen to lectures, right? But we have an undying respect for Muhammad and everybody else involved over there. And I've never met the man. I've never really communicated with him, though he's communicated with me through other people. And Mikey and Muhammad have some kind of a relationship because Mikey was sort of, I think he was like their first graduate or something like that. That they let him study there even though he has no real college degree. And so when he was initially applying, they had to like vet him a little bit. It's like this whole thing. And so Mikey always shouts out New Center. With all that said, let's get into the message. And maybe I'll just have you read it if you'd like to, Benjamin.
All right. So Muhammad says, in discussions about the worst modern 20th to 21st century U.S. president, Jimmy Carter's name is mentioned frequently. People also consider Biden as the worst modern U.S. president. However, I believe the Lifetime Achievement Award in this category should be saved for no other president than Obama. Not only did he not fix the fundamentals in the U.S. economy that caused the 2008 crash, he ended up bailing out the banks rather than putting money toward major infrastructure and reconstruction projects. Not only did he usher in the era of woke capitalism, for Benjamin, representation of the dispossessed without them owning the means of production was fascism, remember? Obama also interfered repeatedly in the Democratic Party's secession plans after himself, fundamentally changing the course of the U.S. and perhaps human history for the worse. First, he should have let the party pick its next presidential nominee democratically, allowing Bernie to get the nomination in 2015. This could have resulted in a two-term Bernie Sanders presidency that would have put the U.S. in the right economic and geopolitical setting, plus more benefits I'm not going to explain here, i.e. winding down the U.S. empire like Britain did after World War II. His other tragic intervention was appointing the corrupt and arrogant Hillary as his successor, preventing Biden from running in 2016. Had Biden was allowed to run, he would have won the presidency over Trump, and we would have had two terms of Biden presidency back to back. This would have given Democrats 16 years of continuity and perhaps changed the course of the 2024 election away from a Trump victory. Also, Obama pushed the selection of Harris as VIP in 2020, hoping for a one-term Biden, but later he found out it would be better for Biden to run for a second term rather than let the incompetent and arrogant Kamala take over the race. Of course, he was aided in this plan by the Biden family, who enjoyed the privileges of having their own man in the White House. Thus, Kamala should have been allowed to run earlier and should have been allowed to distance herself from Biden's policies, including Gaza. So if you hate Trump, remember Obama's complicities.
So yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. And I sent it to you a couple days after first seeing it and suggested maybe we use this for our episode we were already planning on doing, which was going to be a message to Democrats, part 3. Part 2, in part 2, I said we were going to give some of the people in our lives a little bit of time to respond to part 2 before we did part 3. And I can tell you that all of the people in my life who are Democrats, who watch a lot of TV, are having a really bad time of it. And that was, of course, part of the reason Benjamin had said it's not real news. You need to be reading. You need to get away from that television set. And so, I actually quoted you on that, Benjamin, and I pushed it out to all socials because it's just one of those things that's so important, for people to hear. Uh, but I've received a couple of things from people reaching out and being like, "Hey, this seems way worse than you guys are acting. Like, you guys are not freaking out nearly enough. Like, Doge is doing all this terrible stuff, and they're breaking the law, and they're messing up people's, you know, uh, what is it, Medicaid? They're messing up all kinds of uh, all kinds of things for people." And on the other side, I've got people in my life saying it's actually awesome. There's a lot of people I know also saying the Doge thing is awesome. That we're finding out so much about the bureaucratic waste within the federal government. Well, we can come back to that because this I feel like cuts to a much more pressing issue. Let's just assume that everything everybody's saying to me is correct and that Trump is the worst, or that the worst portrayal of Trump going on right now, or like the most fear-mongery portrayal of Trump, it's all true. Given if we grant that, would that make him the worst president in the 20th or 21st century? And that's where Muhammad comes in here and says, no way, it would actually be Obama. So first of all, I kind of want to ask you, Benjamin, what you think about that before we get into what we think about specifically Muhammad's analysis, which I kind of think we'll both have different things on.
Yeah, it's interesting. You could make arguments, historical arguments about various older 20th century presidents. People used to throw out names like Warren Harding or Herbert Hoover for worst president of the 20th century. Uh, People until relatively recently used to throw Richard Nixon's name out a lot or Gerald Ford's. There would be some other names that you could potentially mention if you were thinking in terms of the 20th century. But in part, there's a tendency, I think, to talk about more recent presidents, not just because they're the ones that we are contemporaneous with, but also because there's speculation about what else might happen because of what they've done or what they're doing. Their effects don't seem complete to us.
Exactly.
So there's a kind of nebulous, unknown zone of what else will happen as a consequence of all of this. And I think it's in that Obama's name gets mentioned. There's a sense that there was a missed opportunity after 2008. And that missed opportunity not only allowed terrible things to happen, terrible things that might be much greater yet than we know, but also prevented wonderful things from happening. And it's in part because Barack Obama was portrayed as this savior figure who was going to do incredible things, that the fact that he didn't do these things makes him appear so terrible. It seems to be not just an ineffective presidency, but a presidency in which wonderful opportunities were missed, never to be seen again. I think that's why he's perceived this way. No, I'm not sure that it's quite so true as all that. There are points in this where I think there's some wishful thinking. For instance, I don't think that Bernie Sanders was going to defeat Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primary in 2016. I don't think they simply stole it from him. They certainly did things to make it hard on him, things that we might regard as unfair, but he was still significantly behind, even in independent polling in 2016. So I don't think that he was robbed as such. Though I do think that they certainly did all kinds of things to show their preferences and the way they felt about it. We know in 2020, they did the strategic dropouts to put him in a bad position when it looked like he was potentially going to beat Biden. And that was certainly organizing within the party against him.
And that was
But is that
Obama.
the same thing as actually stealing the votes? I'm not so sure about that. The thing that I would be more inclined to talk about with Obama is the economic recovery and the kind of form that it took. And that doesn't play, I mean, it plays a bit of a role here, but it's not as central as I would make it. I think that the first stimulus being too small and then waiting on the second stimulus till after the midterms when he no longer had the votes to pass it. And then not only not doing the second stimulus, but retreating into the Budget Control Act of 2011, which was austerity. That was a major economic mistake by the administration to do the first stimulus too small, propose the second stimulus too late, and then, in the face of political pressure, flip the policy completely and go into austerity. And the effect of that was to grind the recovery to a halt. And this was done, despite the fact that when Obama came in, he had 60 US senators. He had much larger majorities in Congress than Donald Trump currently has. He had one of the largest governing majorities of any recent US president. You would have to go back multiple generations to find majorities comparably large to those Obama had in 2009. And there was an incredible amount of support from the Federal Reserve for government spending in 2009 because the Federal Reserve was doing quantitative easing. It was printing enormous amounts of money to try to support fiscal stimulus. And then also the inflation rates remained low throughout that period because the drag effect of the recession on the inflation rate was so intense that the Federal Reserve could drop the interest rate, the central bank interest rate, to zero or as close to zero as you can get it without generating a sizable amount of inflation, which wasn't believed to be possible. And it was for this reason that during the first Obama term, you had libertarians on the internet, the Ron Paul types, continuously insisting that this was going to produce crazy inflation. It had to produce crazy inflation. It didn't happen. And yet, despite this rare opportunity to do major long-term investment, Obama passed the stimulus that was too small and then backed away from any further fiscal policy that would have been helpful or effective. The other thing he did that I think doesn't get talked about enough is destroying the country of Libya completely, which he did on the advice of Hillary Clinton and on the advice of the European leaders. He blames them heavily in the memoir, but of course it was his decision. And by removing Gaddafi and then killing him, it produced this power vacuum in Libya. It turned a country that had the highest per capita GDP and the highest standard of living, arguably, in Africa into a basket case failed state. Since then, it has been a haven for illegal migration, for trafficking of various kinds. It's become a place where people learn how to fight, they learn how to become soldiers, and then they spill out from Libya into other neighboring countries, starting major conflicts in places like Mali. This has been an enormous source of instability in North Africa that gets very little attention
No, it
anymore.
does. Yeah, very little.
Very
Even
little. But this is, to me, a huge, huge mistake that he made that was absolutely devastating. And it continues to cause trouble internally within Europe because the consequences for boats coming and for migration and for disturbances in North Africa resulting in further flows of people into Europe, it continues to be felt. Also the inability to manage the situation in Syria and Iraq in such a way that this did not produce an enormous amount of migration. All of this contributed to the increasingly contentious political climate in Europe. And then because he wasn't leading on fiscal stimulus, Europe also fell behind and failed to lead and observed what was going on with him and copied what he was doing. If Obama's going to do austerity in 2011, if Obama's not going to lead on a different approach, then why shouldn't they follow suit? So in Europe, we got an even worse situation where there was an even worse recovery with enormous migration consequences. And this really catalyzed the European right.
so on top of everything that Muhammad is proposing here, you bring in Libya and really like the foreign, I don't want to say meddling, right? This goes way beyond meddling, but really like foreign policy on the part of the Obama administration had a huge negative effect, and it's an effect that gets downplayed or not even acknowledged.
He was also negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a huge free trade agreement that would have very much accentuated the features of the neoliberal system by making it even easier to move jobs to potentially friendly states in the Pacific, giving advantages to countries with extraordinarily uh, bad labor practices. This is something that both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump opposed during 2016. These are the substantive things that happened. And I think they're more important than Obama's role in, say, the 2016 Democratic primary. I think he had a little bit more of a sizable effect in terms of coordinating the dropouts in 2020. And he certainly has intervened in 2024 in a way that caused a significant mess. But if we're talking about president, then that would exclude his actions in 2020 and in 2024, because those are the actions of an ex-president, not the sitting president. If we look at what he did as president, to
Mm.
me, the Budget Control Act of 2011 incredibly incensed me when I was a kid. I mean, I was, I think, 19 at the time. I was incredibly ticked off about the Budget Control Act of 2011 and the uh, destruction of Libya. These were two things that convinced me that there was really no daylight at all between him and Bush. And that's the other guy that we haven't talked about
Right.
as a potential contender.
And we had a couple people in the chat say, what about Bush? What about Bush? Great question.
Yeah,
What
what
about him?
about Bush? He's been getting memory hold because when people see him on TV, he seems like this friendly guy. But in terms of just destroying people and stuff and creating a mess, the mess in Syria and Iraq, the mess in Libya and in the Middle East, when that kicked off the Arab Spring, which turned into the Arab Winter, the people who were cheerleading it the hardest were the old Bush administration types who believed that this was the beginning of the domino effect, that people in the Middle East were seeing the democracy that we had created in Iraq and they wanted it for themselves, and that these revolutions were the spread of the democracy that we had established in Iraq. That was how completely out of touch with reality the Bush administration types were. So, yeah, I think there is a case to be made for Bush. And personally, if you were to ask me who's the worst, Bush, Obama, or Trump, I would lean Bush.
Mm.
But there's an argument for Obama, and I think it's worth discussing the argument.
Yeah, I kind of want to take a stab at, uh, I don't even want to say it's a devil's advocacy point. You know, if I wanted to argue that Obama was the worst president, I think the way I would go about it would be similar to how the Black Book of Communism talks about Stalin in the sort of preface to it. I think in the preface they say, comparing Hitler to Stalin, it's something people often do because Stalin ostensibly had everybody's interests in mind, at least, at the level of his speech acts. People will say, well, yeah, it got bad, but at least he meant well, or at least the movement had some kind of integrity that he could compromise. Like Hitler was just all bad, right? And so when you're doing like which is worse, it's easy to go with Hitler, but then the Black Book of Communism guys, I don't know who the fuck wrote it, but like one of them says, it's like a bunch of editors, they say, the thing is, when a bad guy steps forward and says, hey, let's be bad and selfish, it's different than when a bad guy steps forward and says, hey, let's be righteous and do something crazy for everyone. But then you proceed to do bad things under the name of the good, right? So like this, an ostensibly universalist, working class, pro-oppressed people everywhere kind of movement has a radical responsibility, right? I kind of think that formula could be applied here where you say if Obama is speaking to the best angels of the American spirit and everyone and progress and change and hope, then it kind of gives him an opportunity to do more damage if he causes more and more, way more people to become disillusioned that any kind of real change can be made that way.
Yeah, if people feel good about somebody who's doing bad things, it's easier for that person to do more bad things. And the fact that many people felt good about Obama allowed Obama to do a lot of things that they otherwise would have objected to if they were being done by someone who coded more malevolent to them. And of course, the same is true in reverse for those who liked or preferred Bush or Trump as people or personalities. Then if you like those guys, you don't tend to notice some of the things that go on, or you tend to look for excuses, or you go, well, but they had good intentions. And these kinds of things do come up when people argue about those incredible figures from the 20th century, Stalin, Hitler, incredible figures uh, of totally different ideologies, committed to uh, sharply different visions of the world. When we're talking about Bush and Obama, we are not talking, or Trump, we're not talking about completely different visions of the world. We're talking about different strategies for the American state. And not that different at the end of the day. The most important difference between Obama and Trump, as far as the economy goes, is that Obama wanted free trade with Vietnam and Trump wanted tariffs on China to push the jobs to Vietnam. But ultimately, in either case, the goal is to move jobs from China to places like Vietnam. That is the pivot to Asia, which Obama announced at the beginning of his term. It's a focus on dealing with a rising China, making that the core priority of the United States. It was Obama who said in the debate with Romney that Russia is not the major threat to the United States. It was Obama who said that we have to pay more attention to Asia than to Europe and to the transatlantic alliance. Trump stuck with all of that and furthered it with a different approach that focused more on sticks rather than carrots. But the objectives were very similar. And indeed, Obama's foreign policy, was meant to be don't do stupid stuff. That was how he framed it. Don't get involved in quagmires abroad that are mistakes that don't, this is how he tried to differentiate himself from Bush. So where Bush went into Iraq, destroyed the country, and then expended enormous amounts of resources trying to rebuild it, Obama went into Libya, destroyed the country, and then got out. And then nobody in the media covered what happened after he left. Both of the countries were destroyed. Neither one has a good system today. Neither one is a wonderful place to live today. But in the case of Iraq, because Bush took ownership of it, he received an enormous amount of criticism over what happened there. And everything that happened there was attributed to him and his decision to invade. Whereas in the case of Obama, everything with regard to Libya was conveniently forgotten, even really by the Republicans, whose whole critique of it was simply that some of our guys got attacked in the Benghazi attack, and could there have been better security to protect our people in that situation? They didn't even care about what happened in Libya. They didn't even raise it. That was the incredible thing about the Libya discussion in 2016. It didn't even extend to the country and its fate because everybody in both parties had so completely washed their hands of it. And in the memoir, he blames David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, for not making it work. Like it was the British, like they were going to fix Libya or nation build there or something. What an idiot he was to think that the British could or would do that.
For those who really are just getting the memo, but also just for your own take on it, why does and did you read the memoir, the Obama memoir, or did you just
Parts
hear
of
about
it.
Parts of it. Okay.
parts of
What's
it.
the rationale for like like Hillary is talking to Obama and she's like, "Hey man, we got to do this." And what was internal versus external rationale for Libya for good for killing Gaddafi? Like what was why?
So there was a kind of long-standing grudge against the Gaddafi regime that the UK and France and Italy, to varying degrees, had. Not so much the Italian Prime Minister, excuse me, President Berlusconi. Berlusconi had a relatively decent working relationship with Gaddafi, but there was a long history of incidents with Libya. Most famously, the Lockerbie bombing, this incident in which a plane, I think, was shot down by the Libyans. And the Libyans at one point in time had tried to acquire nuclear weapons.
Okay.
And then they had agreed to give those nuclear weapons up as part of a prolonged negotiation, which Italy played a significant role in. And so there was a certain level, nonetheless, despite the fact that Libya had given up its nuclear program, a grudge against Gaddafi as a person. Uh, Gaddafi had, by the way, when he came into power, he had taken over the oil in the country and used the oil in the country to reduce the length of the working day and to provide a bunch of public services. And this is wealth that had previously gone to a pro-Western elite, principally concentrated in Cyrenaica in the eastern part of Libya. So Gaddafi took that oil wealth and used it to try to raise living standards in Western Libya. And this, of course, created a certain regional division because people living in Cyrenaica felt that they were being exploited by the government. And so there was a certain separatist feeling in Cyrenaica. This separatist movement looked to take advantage of the Arab Spring and to leverage it to maybe get rid of Gaddafi or maybe get Cyrenaica free from Gaddafi. And then this was framed by Hillary Clinton as a question of human rights and a question of oil security. And this was pushed very much by the British and the French as an opportunity to fix a problem that was a longstanding problem in the region. So even though Gaddafi had been given assurances as part of the negotiation over the nuclear material that he would be not touched in return for giving up the nuclear material, they nonetheless proposed a UN resolution to do a no-fly zone over Libya. And the no-fly zone was framed as if Gaddafi tries to bomb the towns in eastern Libya in Cyrenaica, then this will prevent him from doing that. And the Russians co-signed this on that basis, that this was going to be about protecting civilians in eastern Libya from bombing, on the basis of belief that Gaddafi was looking to or interested in bombing the cities of eastern Libya so as to keep that oil flowing into western Libya. Of course, what we then did exceeded that UN resolution because we began bombing and attacking the ground troops of the Libyan army. And in doing this, we ensured that Gaddafi's army lost the civil war. And then once that happened, there was a power vacuum in the country, and multiple different distinct factions began fighting for control of it, based in the different power centers of the country. So you had a faction that was more Islamist in orientation that got established in Western Libya, and you had a faction that was more pro-Western in orientation, at least in terms of preferred geopolitical position, in Cyrenaica. And Cyrenaica is the region of the old monarchy. It's the region that has typically been the power base for more pro-Western regimes or elements in Libya. But nonetheless, these two different sides, hired a bunch of mercenaries from all over Africa, drew all of these mercenaries and fighters into Libya. Gaddafi himself hired a bunch of fighters to try to stay in power, drew all of these people into Libya. When the war ended and these people no longer had fighting to do, they started looking for other things. Anyway, the rationale, the reason that they did all of this is that Hillary Clinton and the European countries thought that this was a once in a lifetime opportunity to get rid of Gaddafi and replace that government with a government that would be more amenable to Western interests and a better uh, behavior in terms of civil rights, in terms of liberal democratic rights. So people go, well, is that disingenuous? Is it really just about oil and really just about geostrategy? I think it is genuinely the case that the people who make these arguments believe in these principles, while at the same time also they are interested in ensuring that what they do has the geostrategic and economic benefits. It isn't an either or. And oftentimes, you're most able to pursue your geostrategic interests if you also believe the ideological justifications. If you
Right.
believe all of it, then you feel very good about what you're doing because not only will people benefit economically and politically, but you do genuinely think that you are in some way advancing the conditions of the people in the country. And this is why Bush held on to this idea, that the Iraqis are better off without Saddam Hussein. No matter what else went on, no matter what else happened, Bush would insist over and over, they're better off without Saddam Hussein. At least there's some possibility of something else now. That's what Bush continues, even to this day, to hang his hat on, that idea. And that's what he says whenever people press him at any kind of event. That's the line he always comes back to.
And didn't I hate that word, but didn't the US take Saddam to the US and then prosecute him and then hang him? Like,
Not to the United States. He was found in a spider hole. He was dragged out of the spider hole, and then the Iraqis put him on trial. So it wasn't the
oh,
Americans putting him on
okay.
trial. It was the Iraqis. And it was the Iraqis who sentenced him to die and then hung him. Of course, it
Oh,
was the Iraqi government that was under the aegis of the United States. But the
yeah,
idea there is that it was this democratic regime that the United States had installed that, in some meaningful sense, did represent an Iraqi people. And so
right.
Bush would make references to the Iraqi people and talk about them as a thing that exists. And then there was this question, is there such a thing as an Iraqi people, given this is a post-colonial state with fake borders that has multiple different uh, factions within it that perhaps have religious or sectarian or ethnic identities that are potentially stronger than any kind of commitment to Iraq as a nation state. So what are we really talking about here? And it was in that environment, by the way, that Biden proposed to soft partition the country into separate, distinct regions. So there
Mm,
was a question about whether to maintain the borders of Iraq. And that question also was raised in relation to the Kurds, who have wanted an independent state, but also the Turks, who very much do not want the Kurds to have an independent state, and therefore have the attitude that that territory, if it either needs to be part of Syria and Iraq, or it needs to be part of Turkey, but it sure can't be part of a Kurdistan, which could potentially foment rebellion within Turkish territory. So there's a lot of different interests at play here.
and this is exactly what you're not going to find in typical news coverage of uh, American politics, especially not US president coverage, right? This is the stuff that, even though I was about as involved as I probably will ever be when it comes to on the ground political organizing uh, in 2016 and then kind of between then and 2020, no, this was not a regular part of the conversation for Bernie organizers even. And I mean, to be fair, Bernie organizers are mostly just regular people. Like, I mean, I'm talking like gas station clerks, baristas, truckers. Like, it was a nice smorgasbord of, like, a slice of regular Americans, not
Yeah, I
Democrats.
don't blame people for not centering foreign policy because historically it's been a very ineffective thing to try to do. Anytime the left centers foreign policy issues, it doesn't tend to get very far doing that. So I don't hold it against anybody that they weren't talking about it. I don't think talking about it would have been very effective in the American political context. I don't think it would
Mm.
have won anybody a lot of votes to talk about it. Nevertheless, if we're going to talk about worst, right, we're not saying that talking about all of these issues would have been effective or useful in a campaign, but these are things these administrations did, and what do
Right.
we think of these decisions,
Right.
right? It's a normative discussion, so
Right.
it's a little different.
Yeah. Well, so Libya. Uh yeah, I've just not thought about it and I'm beating myself up for that. But no, I really appreciate your little crash course here. Now now zooming back out to this question of Obama, and I brought in this principle of when you're the one who's running on hope and change, but then you're really not doing anything very different. I think the obvious comeback is, yeah, but he was stopped every step of the way. You know, he couldn't get the Affordable Care Act through without major bludgeoning of the actual policy. He had to change all of these things that he had to do. So it's the same kind of thing people would say about, oh, well, if Bernie had gotten elected, he would have had nobody on his side and it would have been all uphill. And to me, that just kind of sounds like a thing that people would say to us here and now. So I thought I might bring it up. And then it also sounds like it's related to your book, The Way is Shut.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, it's interesting how people say these things about Obama, but then they don't think any of the same rules apply with Trump. Because Obama tried the huge pile of executive orders. He tried this, especially in the second term. He started doing a ton of executive orders because he got frustrated. He got to a point where he wasn't really able to get the Congress to work with him. And he reached a level of frustration with it where he more or less threw up his hands and stopped trying to engage with them and just began trying executive orders and seeing what would stick. And at the time, the same argument that we're having now about executive orders was had, but the sides were reversed. And the Republicans claimed that this executive action exceeded his authority and was authoritarian in character. And the Democrats defended it, saying he's just trying to get things done. You guys in Congress have completely stymied him. You Republicans have stymied him. And so he's just trying to make the government work. And so the sides were completely reversed. And now that Trump is doing a bunch of these executive orders, now they act like these are all authoritarian. Meanwhile, what happened with those Obama orders? What was their ultimate fate? A couple of different things happened. One is that Trump made orders of his own when he was elected that reversed many of the Obama orders and tore them up. And people framed Trump issuing those orders as uh, potentially authoritarian action. But those orders are simply the mirror reverse of the Obama orders. Uh, so whatever democratic basis Obama had for the orders, Trump had the same plausible basis, especially for orders which were simply reversals of the Obama orders. It's the same democratic basis. Uh, and then secondly, a lot of the Obama orders were stopped by the Supreme Court, a significant number of them. And that same thing happened with the Biden orders. Now, when the Supreme Court stops Democratic presidents' executive orders, we're told that the Supreme Court is behaving undemocratically and is frustrating the will of the president and the people the president represents because it's this uh, you know, corrupt, undemocratic, technocratic institution that gets in the way of the elected representatives, and therefore it should be packed or abolished. Do you remember that whole argument about whether the Supreme Court should be packed or abolished, where a lot of people on the left are making the case that the court, these are unelected judges that are standing in the way, and they've always institutionally tended to stand in the way of things that the left wants, so therefore maybe they should be gotten rid of?
yeah, I
Now,
little bits
now
and pieces
they're
of
saying
that.
if the
Yeah.
court doesn't get in the way of Donald Trump, then the whole system is undemocratic because the court is obligated to defend democracy by blocking these illegal executive orders. Meanwhile, the question of what's democratic is itself something which is typically in the United States litigated through the democratic institutions, which are the three branches of government. But people love to say that if the branch of government doesn't do what I think it should do, then democracy is gone and we have an authoritarian system. And yet, as soon as their party's president wins the next election, then all of a sudden democracy is back and it's real again. And whatever their president wants to do is what's consistent with democracy, properly understood. It's astounding to me how frequently this happens. And the weird thing is, you could be in conversations with democratic theorists at universities, people who study democracy, and they'll make the same arguments. The same arguments. If it's their guy, then it's democracy. And if it's not their guy, then it's authoritarianism. It's incredible to me. And nobody thinks about the inconsistencies here. Why? Because these people are mainly interested in getting what they want out of the government. And if they think it's useful to accuse their opponents of being authoritarians or to frame what they want as consistent with the principle of democracy properly understood, then they'll make these kinds of arguments. But they're not super effective arguments unless you're talking about something which stands out to the vast bulk of people, regardless of party affiliation, as authoritarian. These arguments are not very persuasive or very effective. And there's a relatively narrow set of things, but I think they're very clear things that would strike everybody as authoritarian. If it was no longer the case that we had competitive multi-party elections in the United States, if it was no longer the case that sometimes the Republicans win and sometimes the Democrats win, but the same party won the vast majority of the elections all the time, then we wouldn't have democracy in this country. If the President of the United States seized the powers of other offices in the country, if he made himself the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate and made himself the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and gave himself all of these different offices in violation of the Constitution, that would be very clearly authoritarianism. But people will say, if the president does an executive order and I don't like it, it's authoritarianism. And then as soon as it's their president, it's fine. It's an incredible inflationary use of language. And it's so alarmist and just so ineffective because only people who already agree with you are going to be in any way sensitive to that kind of argument.
Right.
Don't you remember when the other side made that argument? You laughed at them when they called you a communist and an Obamunist and you laughed at them because they were being silly. Don't you see they feel the same way when you use this kind of language? Not you, of course, Dave, but the hypothetical person.
Yeah. Well, and maybe maybe this applies a little bit to like younger Dave or old Dave, however you want to frame. It's always old Dave, young Dave, whatever. Old Dave was young Dave. I don't know. But I did think that at the time that Trump was the worst thing ever, but I also really quickly started noticing some of these hypocrisies. I don't think I ever really sunk my teeth into them as deep as you have, though. And so, to the Democrats in our lives, I want to know what you think about this. And to the people who have loved Democrats in your lives, how do you think that this would sit with them? What do you think they might say? Let us know in the live chat. We'll be right back right after we roll this little PSA, and then you'll all get to see Benjamin's favorite photograph from the Obama years. We'll be right back after this.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Theory Underground exists to cultivate the conditions necessary for a working-class intellectual renaissance that goes beyond old political categories or other identitarian niches. At TU, autodidact workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing institutions or movements are able to challenge their doxa and develop an understanding of the situation we are in.
If you subscribe at theoryunderground.com, you'll get access to a package of courses, including my Intro to Fault Line Theory, which includes Intro to Nick Land and Intro to Slavoj Žižek. These courses are being woven with the 3 courses that take place on a month-to-month basis, spread out throughout the year of 2025. Those courses are 12 Core Concepts and the Fundamental Problems with the Situation Today with social theorist David McCarricker, 12 Essential Political Thinkers with political theorist Benjamin Studebaker, and The Philosophy of Nature with philosopher Nina Power.
The way these all get woven together at a deeper and more meta level is through the ongoing research seminars led by David McCarricker, Benjamin Studebaker, and Michael Downs, where they engage with one another's work by sharing developments from their own perspectives, theory, and research.
If you subscribe at higher levels and support our work, we'll support your development with bespoke teaching. Alone and unaided, we struggle to grasp our situation in its fullness and formulate a meaningful response. By working together and pooling our energies, we can do better. Join us at theoryunderground.com/subscribe.
There'll be 2 kinds of people in 10 years. Those who said, I knew all along Theory Underground was going to make this huge difference. Those are the people that are like Nance, who were on the sidelines at one point and then said, nah, I'm going to get in. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to go hard. And then there's another kind of person, a person who waits in the wings, collects receipts, and who will say in 10 years, oh yeah, I was there. I saw that happen. And then they'll gossip monger. Listen, if you want to get involved, get involved. But if you're going to sit there in the bleachers, well, here's some popcorn. I hope you have fun.
Oh, hey, Dave. What are you up to?
Hello. I'm grading right now. So.
Grading? Well, what's that?
Oh, this? This is a G2 pen. It might be the best pen in the entire world because the price point is perfect for working class people like us. More importantly, cartridges are replaceable. The ink, it glides, but it doesn't smudge too bad. And most importantly, you can do that. And it's really fun.
That's pretty cool.
We at Theory Underground are not sponsored by Pilot, nor does Pilot endorse this commercial. Theory Underground is funded by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.
And we're back. Welcome back, everybody. I had to run and check on the cats. I thought Ryan was outside in that blizzard. It's actually kind of coming down wildly out there. I really didn't expect that. I knew it was cold, but it's also now just an actual snowstorm. And so, who knows? My classes might be canceled today because it hasn't looked like this all year. All right. So, Benjamin, I think we're all done here with Muhammad's piece, right? Is there anything else that we would like to say about it before we move on to your favorite photo from the Obama era?
I think the photo from the Obama era is going to direct us kind of where I want us to go, which is, you know, the post-2008 economic crisis and what was versus wasn't done.
Okay, then the last thing I'd just say about this piece is you had said that there was a little bit of wishful thinking here. And I thought you might say something like that, but I wasn't sure, of course. And so I was looking forward to hearing you unpack it a little bit. I just want to say the confidence displayed by Muhammad here. Now, Muhammad, if this gets back to you, look, this is a point that I make about everybody who's confident in their political predictions. I understand it's probably rhetorically smart to always make confident political predictions, but to me, the confidence always comes off like hubris. I have no idea why people are confident about anything when it comes to the future, much less politics. And so, but specifically the point about how Biden could have beat Trump instead of, like, Hillary couldn't have done it, but Biden could have. To me, that's very strange, because when I think of 2016, I think of the first real populist moment in our lifetimes. Now, the Tea Party and Occupy were the left and right coded versions of that. People can argue one was top down and the other one was bottom up. You'll know a lot about that person's media intake depending on how they frame that. But they are tapping something on both sides. And then those both come to a head in 2016. Okay. Now, if Trump had not been up against like 16 opponents, if the field wasn't so flooded, it could have been harder for him to win. But also, it's just like, for me, this was a populist moment. And the Democratic Party said, nah, man, we're going to run the most anti-populist, most elitist or condescending, or at least distant, we'll say removed candidate possible, which was Hillary. And then we'll just tell people it's her turn. But I guess my question is just like, how would Biden have changed that? Like, Biden is still a very unpopular guy. Like, if it wasn't for flooding the field and then consolidating everybody into Biden on Super Tuesday in 2020, to me, it seems unlikely that he could have gotten as much support as he did, right? There was a sort of folding thing. They had to first flood the field, and then they had to water down Bernie's message by trying to act like all these younger, more supposedly diverse faces have what he has, right? Oh, look, they're all for Medicare for all as well, so what's the problem? The only difference is this is an old white man whose time has passed. These people are young, they're hip, they're gay, they're black, they're women, whatever. That's how the Democratic establishment ran all of these candidates against Bernie, and then consolidated them into an old white man who was not very popular, right? That's how I think about it. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's hard for me to imagine Biden winning back then. But who knows? Maybe. I'm not going to say anything confidently. Yeah.
The argument for Mohammed is that Hillary almost won, even though Hillary was an incredibly unpopular person. Hillary was almost, uniquely unpopular. Many people have a unique hatred for Hillary Clinton that they don't necessarily have for almost anyone else in American politics. And the election was very close. I think if I were to make the case, it would be something along the lines of 2016, 2020, and 2024 are all quite close elections. And you see this especially in the congressional majorities, which have been very small in each of these instances. And what this suggests is that none of the instances individually was for sure in the bag for anybody. And that certain things that you might have done could have spun it, but not in such a way, I think, that it would have been a blowout win. I think if Biden had won in 2016, I think he would have been more likely to win than Hillary. I think almost any Democratic Party nominee would have been more likely to win than Hillary in 2016. But would they have gotten a large majority in Congress? No, I think in any case, their majority would have been, their position would have been somewhat weaker than Obama's in 2012. I think that election would have been closer than the 2012 election in any case. And then, you're talking about going into 2020, into the pandemic. I don't think if the Democrats had the presidency in the 2016 to the 2017 to 21 term, I don't think they're winning the 2020 election. If they had gone 3 terms deep and then got hit with the pandemic, I think they'd be out almost regardless of who the Republicans would have run in that cycle. So I think that it was the 16 years of continuity there and perhaps changed the course of 2024. So this is a suggestion that if only Bernie had been permitted to win, then every election would have been won by a Democrat between 2008 and 2024. I mean, if
Right.
that happened, then you would have to worry about there being a one-party state without competitive multi-party elections. That doesn't look like American history as we've known it or as we've understood it. So it's that part that makes me think, wow. As far as just 2016, sure, I'm willing to believe that you could pick any Democrat and they would have had a better chance than Hillary Clinton in 2016. But 16 or 20 years in a row from 2008, to have that happen, you'd have to believe that Barack Obama made reasonably good policy that Biden could have built off of in such a way that the Democrats could have then gone on to win further elections, right? Or that Bernie Sanders could have built off of in such a way that the Democrats could have gone on to win further elections. I think that the COVID pandemic, now that we know that that happened, brings a firm halt. I think the incumbent president, whoever was elected in 2016, would have been in for a shocker when that pandemic happened, and it would have been very, very hard from there. And that includes if it was Bernie. I think anybody who won in 16 would have been ambushed by that pandemic and put in a very, very tight spot because of it.
So that's your way of saying that you think that COVID would have happened regardless of who was in in office at the time.
Yes.
Cool. I'll be the conspiracy theorist here then, and I'll just say I'm not convinced, but you know, likely, but also there's a lot that we're not supposed to talk about, or at least we weren't allowed to talk about.
Well, if it started in that Wuhan lab, my assumption is that the Wuhan lab would have run regardless of who the president was.
Yeah, the question is did it leak or was it leaked? That's the question, right? That's the and if it's Biden or sorry, if it was Bernie or Trump, then going with it was leaked. If it was, they would have leaked it on either one because they didn't want either one in. So I've said my conspiracy theorist. Now I'll take that hat off and say I don't believe that, but I also don't believe that there is.
Dave, I can't hear you. I've lost the audio for Dave.
I'm back.
There you are.
Had to switch mics. My lapel mic keeps dying even though it's charged. I'm a little concerned about that. But anyway, yeah, I was saying I'll take off my conspiracy theorist hat and set it to the side because it's always like on the table for me. It's not off limits. Just because the CIA comes up with a word for thinking about alternatives to the official narrative doesn't mean I'm going to stop thinking about alternatives. But with taking that hat off, there is no official COVID narrative anymore. There's no official one. There, not after Jon Stewart went on Colbert and did the Wuhan leak thing that he did, right? Like after that, it's like, oh, what's the official line now, guys? And there's not really been one.
At this point, there are two official lines. The departments, the different parts of the American state have fractured on this question.
Yeah.
And now some parts of the American state believe that it was the result of a Wuhan leak, and not a deliberate leak, but an accident or something in China, that it originated in the lab. I think that's the language. And the others believe the wet market theory. There's an actual institutional division at this point with different intelligence agencies on different sides of the question formally. So at this point, either one of these views is an institutional view.
I kind of want to come back to this one. We'll do like our little TrueAnon tribute episode. That'd be fun. Maybe we could actually get some of those people on, you know, that'd be cool. But, you know, to me, serendipity happens all the time. Things happen in ways that, in reality, things happen in ways where if you wrote it in a book, people would say, that's not believable, right? So like reality is often weirder than fiction. But with that said, it's like, seems a little too serendipitous that Epstein got offed and then COVID came so soon after. Like, it just seems like too good too good to be true. Too good, guys. I feel like we live in a really weird timeline. Okay, but with all that said, let's get to your favorite photograph here. And then maybe at some point, if I can remember, we'll come back to DX1 All 33's comment, which was a really good question from the beginning of this stream. I've got it highlighted. I'll share it into the Zoom chat here so we don't forget, hopefully. But here we go. We've got it up on the screen now, but for people who cannot see what we're looking at, it is the shape of the United States, and it's all cut up into little tiny patches for counties. Is that right, Benjamin? These are counties?
Yes, these are the counties of the United States, and they're in different colors. And the color reflects the share of national employment growth between 2010 to 2016 that county contributed. And this is a chart that comes from the Brookings Institution, which is a very centrist, very establishment, kind of center-left liberal institution, using data from Moody's Analytics. So this is all establishment numbers. There's no playing around. It's just the standard kind of data, standard kind of statistics that people discussed in the tens. It used to be that more of these institutions and organizations discuss these things. And what you'll see, if you can see this map, and I'll describe it to you in case you can't see it, is that a very large number of these counties are orange. And if they're orange, that means that their share of national employment growth between 2010 to 2016 was negative, which means that they lost jobs. Then there's a set of counties that are gray, and this is also a very large number of counties. And these counties contributed to the share of national employment growth 0 to 0.07%, which means these counties grew extraordinarily negligibly in terms of jobs. So if you add up the orange counties and the gray counties, well, what you find is that it's the overwhelming majority of counties, and that many of the states on the map consist almost entirely of these counties, with only 1 or 2 counties that are even light blue to medium blue. And then, of course, the counties that got the largest number of jobs, these are deep blue, dark blue. So what you see as you look around, if you were to zoom in and you were to look at many of the counties that are blue, which you can't do because this is a screenshot, you can't actually see what cities or towns are in these counties. But what you will find is that many of the counties that are blue contain some of the largest cities in those respective states. So what you will find is that there's a concentration of the jobs in the metropolitan areas within the states, with counties that are outside of these cities left behind, not able really to contribute meaningfully to job growth. Now, I used to throw this chart around all the time immediately after Donald Trump was elected, because I think it's just really important to understand. It's one thing for a county to contribute not very much to national employment growth because it's a low population rural county. You wouldn't expect the rural counties to contribute as much as the major cities, but to have so many counties in orange on this map, you can rationalize the gray counties in very low population states, but you cannot rationalize the orange counties. These are counties that not only grew much slower than urban counties, they lost jobs. And Donald Trump did significantly better in the orange counties than he did in any of the counties that are any shade of blue on this map. He did significantly better. And this had a lot to do with the fact that Obama in 2011 went with the Budget Control Act, acquiesced to the demands from the Republicans in Congress that he cut spending, proposed even some of his own cuts that they did not even ask for to try to get them to pass budgets. And this all happened after he opened up the beginning of the administration with a stimulus that was too small, so it didn't have enough of an effect fast enough in a sufficiently visible way. And because it didn't have a sufficient effect, people lost confidence in the strategy. So when he came and asked for more, they didn't believe that it would work. They thought they were throwing good money after bad. And they had good reason to think that because he made such a big deal out of the first stimulus bill, and it was actually not nearly adequate to the scale of the disaster. So by claiming that that fiscal stimulus bill was this great big act, he created a situation where people would not be willing to do it again.
Oh, I see.
And this is the same thing happened, by the way, with Biden, where Biden came in and he talked up this Build Back Better plan that was supposed to be this huge plan to generate all this growth. And what happened is that the plan was repeatedly reduced in size until it only provided, I think, about 500 billion in new infrastructure spending at a time when the demand from the American Society of Civil Engineers was for something like an incredibly vast amount, like 4 trillion. A huge, huge infrastructure deficit they claimed we were facing. And nevertheless, the bill was reduced to such a degree that it included only a very, very small amount of new infrastructure spending. And then the bulk of what it did include was giveaways to NGOs and climate spending and stuff that was not really focused on meeting the needs that the bill was originally proposed to meet. And then they slapped the name Inflation Reduction Act on it, which didn't make any sense because it's a spending bill. Spending bills aren't about reducing inflation. Why would you call it something like that? So you're not going to reduce inflation with a spending bill. And so it produced a similar kind of effect. They talked up this thing so much, and then it underdelivers because they've cut it down to such a point, and they have filled it with the wrong kinds of things. And they've created a situation where there's going to be this expectation that it's going to deliver spectacularly. And if it doesn't deliver spectacularly, nobody's going to want to do another one for a very long time. And they're going to say, this is just how you waste money. And this is where we are now. Their attitude is that the government is throwing good money after bad. It's wasting money. So now they're in the austerity mode and they're looking for stuff they can cut. And this is created in large part by this move that these Democratic presidents make, the beginning of their terms, where they go, we're going to do this huge spending bill and it's going to make such a difference. And then they water it down and fill it with crap. They do it every time. Nobody ever wants to do another one of those after that. And it takes 8 years, 10 years, long, long periods of time. That first Obama stimulus was 2009. And then the Biden stimulus was 2021. So that was what, 11 years before you get to do another one? It's not sufficient when you have a country this size to do this kind of state investment in these, once every decade chunks.
And your point,
in response to a crisis.
So not only do you lose that credibility, but also the opportunity, if there is a genuine opportunity there, is lost. Which is to say, the Federal Reserve is down to do this quantitative easing. You blew it. You blew it.
Yeah. Yeah. And Obama had a better opportunity than Biden, because by the time Biden got in, most of the major decisions regarding how the pandemic was going to be handled had already been taken by Trump. Because most of the major stimulus that was about just getting through the pandemic came through in 2020. Stuff like the Paycheck Protection Program, that was about immediate crisis relief. So by the time Biden got in, we were in a situation that was more likely to become inflationary because it was an attempt to recover from a crisis that involved shutting down production of lots of things for periods of time. That's the kind of crisis that can generate inflation. Whereas the 2008 crisis was a crisis of consumer demand. It was a crisis of access to credit. It was a crisis in which people had a hard time getting loans that they needed to be able to start businesses, buy houses. It was a time when the value of their houses was plummeting, so people were trapped living in places where they, were underwater on their mortgage. So it was a very different kind of crisis, and it produced a different physical environment. The opportunity for Obama was much bigger than Biden as a consequence of this. And a lot of the guys who are into MMT, they don't make these distinctions about different kinds of crises because the reason MMT became popular is that there was a very significant period of time in which we were not seriously inflation constrained in terms of what we could do. It was really hard to generate inflation during the tens, very, very hard to generate any significant level of it. And because of this, you could do a lot more spending without inflation. But once the COVID pandemic happened, that shifted the character of the economic crisis and turned it into the kind of crisis that could produce a lot of inflation because it involved long-term shutdowns of substantial parts of economies all over the world.
Supply
So
chains.
it created supply chain disruption, it created shortages of things, and that generated inflationary pressure, which they'd been trying to generate some level of it, a reasonable level of inflation, so that they could get the interest rate back up again, so that the interest rate could once again be an effective tool or a semi-effective tool for trying to manage the economy. They wanted to get it off of zero. It had been near zero for an incredibly long time. If you look at the interest rate graph, there's this long period of near zero rates where the interest rate is near what they used to call the zero lower bound. And in that situation, the central bank has no room to drop the rate lower if something else bad happens. So the central bank is nervous when they're at the zero lower bound. They want some excuse to raise the rate a bit to give themselves some room to drop it again. And the COVID-19 pandemic did have the effect of creating conditions under which the Federal Reserve could raise the rate. And so that means now you have an interest rate that is elevated, which makes it much harder to buy a house, for instance, because that interest rate is something that you face when you try to buy a house. So now the crisis is you can't buy a house instead of a crisis of just total consumer demand, a crisis of employment. Now you're in a situation where you're struggling to get a house because the interest rate's been lifted and your favorite stuff in the store is too expensive or it's smaller than it used to be, or sometimes you can't get it. That's been the change in the character of the crisis. But it produces a totally different physical environment. And the MMTers, they don't pay attention to context. So for them, their point of emphasis is taxes don't pay for spending. And yes, that is true. Nevertheless, if you spend indefinitely and you don't find a way to take the money out of the economy through some mechanism, you get inflation. And in some circumstances, that happens sooner. In other circumstances, it happens later. So in the circumstances where it happens later, you have more flexibility and you have more policy options and you can do more spending before you're going to feel an inflationary constraint. But in other circumstances where you already have supply chain disruption, spending a ton of money is not going to have the same kind of effect. So it was very difficult because the time to have done all that infrastructure spending and to have met the demand of the civil engineers was actually 2009. That was when we had the real space to be able to enact a huge kind of spending measure that would have addressed the infrastructure problems that are emerging in a proactive way and would have generated a lot of jobs and generated a lot of industrial activity in the United States because we would have produced a lot of things internally within the country to support those infrastructure projects, right? That was put off and delayed because Obama underdid it. And so when Biden is trying to do this infrastructure spending in 2021, he's doing it in a much less favorable environment. And so not only is he, again, not able to do a very large amount of it, but then the inflation does kick off much more rapidly because of the different environment that he's in. And this means that you're going to feel the inflation, and then you're going to be very frustrated with Biden for having generated this inflation with the policy. So, and this is what made the COVID pandemic so difficult, because if you did these shutdowns, then you were going to be in a situation where you would eventually pay for those shutdowns with inflation and supply chain disruption. And you can try to paper over it with spending for a while, and you can delay it, and you can kick it down the road for a while. But that means that as these supply chains are being disrupted, you're also going to have consumers flooded with a ton of cash coming in from the Paycheck Protection Program and from those checks that everybody was sent. And this stuff is going to kick up consumer spending at a time when your supply chains are a little messed up, and it is going to have an inflationary effect. But try actually talking through this. I mean, when they had the presidential debate and they argued about COVID, they just objected to each other's statistics on the grounds that COVID either was at the beginning of those statistics or at the end of those statistics. And they never explained to people what the effect of COVID is on any of the numbers. They both feel that the fact that COVID is included in the numbers for their administration is unfair to them. Trump goes, yeah, but then COVID happened. So you can't count what happened to me because of COVID. And Biden goes, yeah, but we were responding to COVID. So you can't factor in what I did because this was a response to an exogenous event. They use COVID as this exogenous event that simply controlled the trajectory of the economy while they were in office and claim that outside of this event, their policy is good. But of course, if you were in office in either the 2017 to 21 period or the 21 to 25 period, your presidency is defined by the economic consequences of COVID. That is ultimately what your presidency is going to be. So I view both of those terms as not altogether different from one another because the major thing that happened in both of those terms was the pandemic. The person who actually had a moment where he had an opportunity to do something turned out to have been Obama. And in fact, even if Bernie had won, because the pandemic was going to happen and the pandemic was going to create a wildly different environment, it would have appeared that Bernie's policies would have looked inflationary given COVID, and it would have caused people to become very upset. None of us could have known this in 2016. And in 2020, as that campaign was happening, Bernie was going into Super Tuesday right at the very beginning of the pandemic. So we didn't know how that was going to shake out at the time that we were doing all of that. But COVID was going to swallow up whoever won in 2016 and whoever won in 2020. It was Obama who had the opportunity to do real spending and to plan ahead in some sense. And he did flub it.
So if you're listening to this, Mr. Obama, that's where we think the ball was dropped, right there in 2009. We'd love to have you on to talk about it. You can make your case, but yeah, that's our that's where Benjamin stands anyway. Like I said, with COVID, who knows? But
and mainstream liberals argued this at the time. Paul Krugman's face was on Newsweek. The loyal opposition, as he said, the stimulus is too small. This is said by liberals at the time. This is not me saying it because I don't like Obama or I don't like the Democrats or I'm out there left wing. This was said by mainstream people at the time, by people with New York Times columns. This argument was made extensively. It was made by academics. It was made by economists. The IMF put out a working paper saying that there should have been more spending. This was something that was eventually widely understood.
And so what would he say then? Would he just say, well, yeah, you say that now, but where I was situated at the time, there was just no way. There was just no way that
he would. Yeah, he would blame congressional opposition. And then, of course, the corresponding response is, shouldn't the members of Congress be concerned that if they don't support your policies, that their voters are going to be angry with them? Given that you've got 60 senators, you have a majority in both houses, shouldn't those Democrats be concerned that if they don't support you, that they're going to have a problem in the midterms? Why is it that they're more afraid of the Republicans than they are of your own supporters? Why is it that they're not scared of getting primaried for not supporting you? The thing is, they claim now that Donald Trump has created this climate of fear where these Republicans won't vote against him. If that's true, then that's amazing because he's only got a majority of 3, I think, in the House. And I think it's also 3 in the Senate. It's a very tiny number in both. So if it's really the case that all of these Republicans are so scared to appear to be opposing him, well, how come Obama wasn't able to intimidate politically the members of his own caucus in the House and Senate? Why is it that he wasn't able to manage these people? He had larger majorities. He had more room for maneuver than Donald Trump has right now, substantially more room. He had the most room for maneuver of any president in the last 40 years, at least. So he can say, everybody opposed me in Congress, but nobody had better numbers than him. Nobody had more extra seats, more votes they could afford to lose than he had. He was not very good at managing the Congress. And this is because he was inexperienced, he didn't have good connections, and he didn't have great social skills when it comes to managing people in Congress. He was telegenic, he was able to communicate with voters with some level of efficacy. He was not good at talking to members of Congress.
Interesting. Stuff that I have up on the screen here is the United States all grayed out. It's got every one of the counties on it. None of them are colored in. But it adds the state shapes. And the reason I pulled this up was a sort of natural curiosity that I suspect many of you have, which is, wonder what my county was like it during this time, 2010 through 2016, right? Well, I can't speak for most of you all, but I'll speak for myself, and then we'll try to find Mikey. It'll be kind of like pin the tail on the donkey. We'll have a little fun with it. So, of course, just looking at the map, I assumed up here, this little one that's all orange, I thought that must have been where I was at the time because shit was bad, you know?
No, that's a Montana county, isn't it?
You're right. You're right. Yep. Good job. You got it. You can see it right here. You can see it's a corner of Montana. No, where I was is right here. I'll pull it up. I already screenshotted it. You see it right here. So North Idaho, you've got Shoshone, Benewah, Kootenai, Bonner. What's the top one? I always forget this one. It's Boundary, right? Boundary.
Yeah. That's an appropriate name for that county. It is the Boundary.
For a border town, yeah. Exactly. I mean, I've met people who had their own reasons for having to go across that border secretly off in the woods, you know. Now, I was in Kootenai.
Those counties are gray on that map.
They are. Yep, they're gray.
Yeah.
Which is the 0 to 0.07%.
Yeah, those are the stagnant growth or extreme low population counties, one or the other.
Yeah, you can see them right here where the mouse cursor is. Can you see the mouse cursor on the screen?
Yeah, I can.
So that's these ones right here. And I was in this one, Kootenai, but then because of the economic crisis, I moved from Kootenai to Bonner to be with my parents because my entire situation got completely screwed in Kootenai. So things were rough, and I had no economic awareness at the time outside of my own immediate finances.
What year were you forced to leave Kootenai?
Well, I went through a series of housing. I'd say like I was housing insecure, you know, between 2008 and 2011, right? And, you know, I kind of went from one situation to another, and I ended up living with no lease at this one place where I was kind of doing a work exchange. So that I found a place that was unlisted, and I found the person who was the landlord, and I said, hey, you know, I understand your place is unlisted because of your bad interior on this house. I'll fix it up if you let me live in there. And I ended up spending all my savings fixing it up, and that got me a lot of time there. But I also moved some roommates in, and the thing is I was supposed to make back my savings with those roommates, but then those roommates all quit their jobs to be in bands. It was a bad situation. And then they all referred to me as Daddy Dave and complained about the fact that I wanted money. So I ended up losing all of my savings while fixing up this house. And then I ended up moving out of that house and into a trailer park with my buddy Chris. We during better times lived on the other side of the wall of this trailer park. We were in an actual rental house, and we knew about this trailer park because it was right beside where we met, where we worked. But then it's like the weird story, you know, things just got worse and worse. And then all of a sudden I'm living in a trailer park and I've got people smoking meth and, you know, domestic abuse right outside the door. It was actually crazy. And then that wasn't sustainable. And so Chris and I had to part ways. We've lived together a few times, me and Chris. And so, yeah, I ended up back at my parents'. And I said, I'm so sick of this. I have to get serious about my life. I have to get serious about my life. I have to find a way to do something. All of the businesses I've tried to start failed, you know, like lawn mowing companies, construction companies, blah, blah, blah. All of the jobs I had, they didn't work out. And so I was like, I'll apprentice under you, Dad. I'll learn appliance repair. But the thing is this was a really bad time for business for my dad, too. And so I was apprenticing with him. But things were going downhill, and he basically wanted out as well. It wasn't good. So let's play pin the tail on the donkey for Mikey, though. Let's dox Mikey, yeah? So that's a joke, obviously. Everybody knows he lives in Raytown, Missouri. And so let's zoom in on Raytown. We got Kansas City, Missouri right here, baby. And the red line here you see, that is Mikey's county. So then the question is, can we find
Is that urban enough to be a blue county on this map?
Ooh. So, okay, where the heck is Missouri on here?
Yeah, we're talking about the part of Missouri that borders Kansas, because we're talking about Kansas City. So we must be. Yeah, I think he's in a high growth county, just barely.
Which is wild, because that Raytown has just been
around there.
Raytown has just been decimated. It's like he's seen it. You know, he lived in the glory days there, and it's just been all downhill ever since then.
His county's got a significant part of Kansas City in it. That's the thing.
So that fucks the numbers up.
So, yeah, because they do it by county. You see that little group of blue counties right there on the border between Kansas and Missouri. No, that's Colorado.
Oh, that's Colorado.
Yeah, go a little over.
So we got to go over.
See, there's Kansas. And then see that little group of four blue counties?
Are you saying this is Kansas? Right here?
Yeah, that's Kansas. Yeah, see that line there?
Right here?
Yeah, and that group of four blue, I think that's the area around Kansas City.
Wait, you mean down here? These four blue?
No, that's Texas.
These four blue?
I mean, that group right there. Yeah.
Oh, there's dark blue and lighter blue. Okay.
Yeah, it's a kind of mid blue, so it's not one of the super, super high growth zones, but it's a relatively high growth county compared with the country as a whole.
Well, there you go, Mikey. According to all the numbers, you should have been fine, man. You should have been fine.
Even these numbers reveal an enormous amount of suffering. That's the thing that's amazing. The statistics never capture how much people have suffered, even though they try. And these statistics did, in my view, a better job than most, because they exposed something that was otherwise very difficult to see, which is that the recovery actually did not take place in a very large number of counties. Did not take place at all, because they lost jobs between 2010 and 2016.
The recovery did not take place.
In the orange counties on this map, it did not take place. It wasn't just weak. It wasn't just insufficient. If you were in an orange county on that Brookings map, it did not take place.
Brian Walsh in the chat said, Kansas City, Missouri is like the birthplace of MMT. Really? I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. My county on this map is gray. I'm immediately adjacent to an orange, but I'm gray.
You're gray.
Yeah.
So
I'm in Northwest Indiana.
So it's really just urban
Not today,
places.
but in general.
It's really just urban places and not all urban places that did all right. So, for instance, then what about the
occasionally you catch?
Is this Spokane? This light blue? Would that be Spokane then?
Might be.
Yeah.
There are a few of these rural counties that did a little better. Like you'll notice, there are some in the, there's a few in, some of the, a few here or there in the Carolinas that might be not so urban. Maybe there are some Californian counties that are not very urban that did okay, and some in Colorado that did okay.
How about them Dakotas?
But by and large, you can find a couple in the Dakotas that are very light blue. So that would be less than 0.19% of national employment growth. The Dakotas aren't super populated, but there's a little bit of, maybe some of the pipeline activity, the shale
That's
drilling.
what I was going to go for, yeah.
A couple of those counties. Yeah, but it's not a very large percentage.
So it's just these ones right here. This little blue and that little blue. Am I in the Dakotas right now when I'm so this would be south or North Dakota. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what I wanted to say about North Dakota earlier when you were talking about the growth, the bounce back, the jobs, the job creation, that became a bit of a meme for us in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, because I remember like everyone was talking about, oh, there's great paying jobs in North Dakota, and then I was instantly interested, but then I remember a couple people being like, no, Dave, those are not great jobs. They're not going to last very long at all. And so, yeah, I knew several people. One of my brothers, he kept working over there, and then several of the guys from my music scene. People that I used to party with, they were going to North Dakota. One of them died from a car accident while there. But it was like the wild, wild west. There were brothels. There was like any vice that could be sold to people. It was just on Main Street. And you had these fake towns pop up. And they were just, it was like you could think of like Las Vegas popping up little satellites almost in North Dakota. And so a lot of people went there to make good money and buy a truck and a house and come back and get married. But what happened was they ended up addicted to something that ruined their lives. And then the source of income that they became used to satisfy those new addictions went away when the drilling jobs went away. And this was all Obama.
Yeah, and insofar as those jobs were gone by 2016, they won't necessarily show up here as having contributed to national employment growth.
Oh, really?
Over
Okay.
the period.
Oh, okay.
So if they were kind of pop-up jobs that came and went between 2010 to 2016, then they might not count as contributions to national employment growth over the 6-year period. Another thing that sticks out on this map is Michigan and the area around Detroit, which you see that extend well beyond the immediate bounds of Detroit, several counties deep into Michigan, because of the automobile bailout. And if you notice, the UAW, the United Auto Workers Union, yeah, it's in Michigan. Yeah, see that nexus of blue counties on the Canadian border in Michigan? That's the Detroit region. Yeah. And the automobile bailout really bought off the UAW, which is why the UAW is the union which defends the Democrats most vociferously to this day. The Republicans all made it clear that they were prepared to let Detroit fail. And for that reason, the UAW is completely appendage to the Democrats and will completely slavishly follow them.
Well, that's the will of the working class, don't you know? Don't you know?
But, that's the thing that they missed the opportunity to do in so many other parts of the country. They missed the opportunity to very clearly and obviously do something to rescue employment in many of these other places.
Ian said, "Happy birthday, Benjamin." And yes, yesterday was your birthday. Congratulations.
Yes, I turned 33 yesterday.
You just keep going around the sun, man. You're unstoppable.
Right?
It's awesome. Yeah. So high five virtually for making it around again. Yeah. I'm going through the comments here real fast. Darren said, I think the upshot of showing the map is that for the most part, job growth in rural America was terrible leading up to the election of Trump in 2016.
Yeah.
Slowski said, dark blue was melting, closure after closure. Galen said, the county next to us voted Democratic in every presidential election from FDR up until 2016 when it flipped. Elliott County.
Elliott County.
Yeah, where's Elliott County? Oh, I don't know about that one.
Yeah, I don't know.
Zong Wei said, I am not...
In Kentucky?
Oh, in Kentucky? Zhang Wei said, I am not working class, but I do wear Carhartt to show solidarity. Funny. You guys are funny. Sean Moon said, Listen Liberal by Thomas Frank is the best book on this topic. It's definitely a good book. It is
a good book on this topic.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah,
Elliott County is, I think, in the huge nexus of orange in Appalachia that you can see on this map.
Where's Appalachia on this map? Where are we looking?
Yeah, just a little further over from your mouse there, in that big blob of orange. That's the Kentucky, West Virginia, Appalachia zone. If you recall, after Trump was elected, the J.D. Vance book framed this mainly in terms of cultural deficiencies on behalf of the Scots-Irish migrants who lived disproportionately in Appalachia. And that book, which put the blame on an ethnic migrant group, was praised heavily by liberals.
You're saying...
But if you read that book, it explicitly blames Scots-Irish migrants for having a culture of blaming others for failure and not taking advantage of opportunities and seeking revenge rather than looking for growth. So it slagged off a population group, an immigrant population group to the United States. And there were a number of books like this which tried to claim that there were cultural divisions in the country that came from particular white migrant groups that had brought certain vices with them from Europe, certain negative attitudes that were essentially or constitutively theirs, and which moving to the United States had failed to disrupt. This is something that I think is a horrific excuse to blame ethnic groups, cultural groups, religious groups for this and for the way people felt about this map. And that was always, my number one bone to pick with J.D. Vance is that he made himself a celebrity with a book that attacked an ethnic group, a white ethnic group. So people felt like it was fine. People excused it because the Scots-Irish migrants to Appalachia are white. Not only did they excuse it, they praised it as an insightful explanation for Donald Trump's victory.
Yep, I haven't read it.
And then he ran for Senate in Ohio, and people think of him as this champion of working people.
If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have known that that's what that book did. Everyone made it sound like it was just a look into the miserable lives of Appalachian folk.
Yeah, no, the argument, he starts with a discussion of how he used to work this manual labor job, picking up like big, I think like concrete or big slabs of something and moving it, a manual labor job. And he said this was a good job. It paid I think it was something like $12 an hour. And he claimed that his coworkers were insufficiently committed to this job. They didn't take it seriously. They didn't see it as an opportunity, even though it paid this good wage. And they were always looking to leave. They were difficult to retain, and they were always not working their hardest on the job. And of course, this is just a job he worked en route to his professional class career.
Jeez.
But what he learned from working with these people is that they're lazy, and that's why they're poor. And he made that come across in the introduction to that book. Anybody who reads that book, anyone who reads it, it's very easy. You can read the first 10 pages of it and you'll pick up on this.
Jeez.
It's incredible. And the liberals loved this book. They thought it was amazing. And they created him. They turned him into a celebrity over that book.
Thanks a lot, Obama. or liberals. Come on, what are you doing? So
now they claim that he's changed. He doesn't have those politics anymore. The conservatives, they say that he's not like that.
Yeah, he's reformed.
Become a Catholic, and he has become a Trump supporter, and now he is no longer the person who criticized Trump and wrote Hillbilly Elegy.
No, guys. Now, I had, before we close out, one remaining thing. Remember, I shared it in the chat there. I said, let's address that question. And so if you want to read it out, I'll scroll up and try to remember the name of the person who shared it. It was like a bunch of numbers.
The question is the president who implements a bad new policy worse than the one who cements that policy by continuing it? The answer that I would give to this question is that it depends on the context and whether we think that there was room for maneuver. So, for instance, when I was comparing the post-2008 crisis context to the post-COVID crisis context, I discussed, how much room was there for spending without generating inflationary results? Because if there was more room for spending, then it was a bigger miss to not do the spending. And if there was less room for spending, then it's not as big a miss. Then the policy was more heavily constrained and there was less room. So the case I made there is that in 2021, there was less room for maneuver. In practice, because of the size of the Biden majority in Congress and because of the situation following the pandemic, it was politically a more difficult situation. And therefore, you would not expect as much in that situation. It would take more skillfulness from the president to be able to create something significant or lasting out of that situation, right? So sometimes when you implement a bad new policy, you might not have a lot of room for maneuver. It might have been that almost any president would have implemented the bad policy in that situation. And other times, there were real options available and some real possibility that it could have been different had you taken different decisions and gone about it in a different way. So it depends a little bit on how much room you've got. Similarly, when we're talking about continuing a policy, sometimes the fact that your predecessor started something makes it very hard for you to get out from under that, right? So in the case of Obama, because he underspent in his first term, this created a lack of investment problem that it's now difficult to get out from under, because now we've moved into a different context where the consequences of spending are different from what they would have been in 2009. And that means that it's harder now to undo the mistake of the chronic underinvestment that Obama began. So I would not fault so much a president for underspending in, say, the 2016 or 2017 or 18 or 19 or 20 or 21 or 22, these fiscal years. I don't think it's as bad as underspending in 09. But there are other areas where we might say that actually it was understandable for the president to make the initial mistake, but once the initial mistake was made, continuing with these mistakes is the worst thing because there was really an opportunity to stop and that opportunity was missed. So that's what I would say. It's difficult to answer purely at the level of theory. It depends on the specific policies and what the policy environment was.
So shout out to DX1all33 for that fantastic question. I think we've had a really quality live stream chat today. I really want to shout you all out. You've done a good job helping make this production better than it would have been if you all were not participating. We would have had a great conversation, but the people who are going to enjoy this as a standalone podcast episode wouldn't have had Benjamin responding to a quality question like that one, would they? I want to shout out Jacob, who said Obama was the king of broken promises. He was supposed to be the transparent president, and he went after whistleblowers harder than any of his predecessors, which is my segue into what disillusioned me on Obama, because I voted for him. Second time around. First time around, I was a Ron Paul person because I knew nothing. Of course, I didn't even know anything when I voted for Obama. I voted for Obama for the simple reason that I felt like people were not being fair to him. If I were to do that, if I were to stick to that approach, I think I would have voted for Trump because I just was surrounded by people who were being hypocrites, who weren't being fair. You know, I was mad at people calling him a socialist. I was irritated that people were blaming him for things that seemed like were out of his control. But also when I watched him speak, he was saying things like he would shut down Guantanamo Bay. He was saying he would repeal the Patriot Act. And at that point, I was aware of Bradley transition to Chelsea Manning. And I was, following Julian Assange somewhat back then, right? And so Obama saying that he would shut down Guantanamo and repeal the Patriot Act was a really big deal to me back then. Yeah, I don't think he did anything on that. And not only did he not do anything on that, there were more wars. And yeah, he was the deporter in chief, which wasn't on my radar at the time, but definitely became on my radar after everybody was like, oh, Trump's so bad for deporting illegals. And it was like, that's where I quickly became aware. Oh, what are you talking about? Obama was terrible.
Yeah, the
on
number
this.
of people, in the first term of the Obama administration, the number of people he deported each year was between double and quadruple what it was in any of the Trump or Biden years. Some years of the Trump and Biden administrations, it was around 100,000. Other years, around 200 or 250. Obama routinely exceeded 400,000 deportations a year. Obama achieved what J.D. Vance has said he'd like to achieve, which is 1 million deportations over the term. He not only achieved it, he blew it out of the water in that term and deported way more than even J.D. Vance, I think, is dreaming of. But we'll see what the numbers look like. We'll see ultimately, because I'm sure that this administration will try to get the deportation numbers up. We'll see if they're able to catch Obama's record-setting figures, at least for the period in which we have reasonably good data, the data series that we typically look at.
Exactly.
Though I suppose if we went back to the 80s and looked at Operation Wetback, we might look at those Obama numbers differently. I'd have to go and look at that. I haven't looked at that particular comparison in quite a while.
Is that really what it was called?
Yeah, that's what it was called.
Oh
back in the 80s.
Fuck.
Yeah,
that's like
I'd have
calling
to look
it
at those stats.
Yeah, was it considered a slur yet? Wetback?
People act like it's authoritarian if they do watered down, muted versions of things celebrated 20th century presidents did. Presidents that people like, that they name buildings after, they do these things. And then when 21st century presidents do half-assed, watered down versions of these things, they act like democracy is collapsing. It's incredible to me. The presidents of the 20th century were so much more active in general than any of these guys in terms of the stuff they did. Like, as bad as the Iraq War was, if you look at combat deaths and expenditure in Vietnam, it completely dwarfs Iraq. in terms of the scale of what was done. Yeah. The 21st century, just in terms of violence and carnage and awfulness, there's a lot of terrible things that have happened. We've talked about many of them on this show, but it just doesn't compete with the 20th century, with the things that happened during the Cold War. It just doesn't compete at all. But all of this has been forgotten because the people that are acting like the sky is falling were 20 and not paying attention in the 20th century. They were having sex and drinking beer and having a good time. They weren't paying attention to all these things that were going on in the Cold War. So the fact that statistically the Cold War was incredibly violent relative to now and incredibly brutal relative to now in all kinds of ways, none of this is remarked upon.
Yeah, one of my favorite Democrats who's very depressed right now in his 50s told me he really liked punk back in the day and rock and roll, you know, but he liked punk from Britain, not from the US, because US punk always seemed crazy to him since there was really nothing to rebel against in the 70s and 80s. And of course, you know, he told me that we have it so good as white males. And I didn't argue with him because when a person's in their mode and they're just doing their thing and it's like, well, this is just expression. This is like the clothes you wear. I'm not trying to pick apart the clothes you wear. Like we're just hanging out. This is not a person who likes to have disagreements with me. So I was like, yeah, you know, yeah, we totally have it good as white males. And I'm over here just thinking, my God, man, I don't know what kind of world you lived in, but sure.
Yeah, if somebody says there was nothing to rebel against under Nixon and Ford and Carter and Reagan, you know that they just weren't paying attention. It's like when the owner of the Dallas Mavericks recently, he said that Shaquille O'Neal was such a hardworking player his whole career, when we all know that, you know, if we followed basketball back in the day, that Shaq played his way into shape over the course of the season, exactly like Luka Doncic does.
This is a sport.
People just forget about stuff from the past.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It'd be good. Could you write a popular book to Americans about what's been memory hold by this last 10 years of political discourse? I mean, I think we'd all like to see that one, man.
Yeah, you know, when I was a kid, when we were in high school, I could remember all the stuff that happened when we were in middle school. So when we were like 16, 17, 18, my friends, they would come to me to hear the stories of the things they did when they were 11, 12, and 13 that they couldn't remember anymore.
Really?
You know, I've always socially kind of played this role of I can remember the stuff from a little bit before. And when it comes to politics, because I started following it when I was eight, I started paying attention very young. And when you're young like that, you lock a lot of little facts and details into place in your memory. You know, it's like if you try to remember I can remember the starting lineups of most of the NBA teams from, 1998 to around, 2002, 2003, because when I was a kid, I got obsessed with basketball. And I could tell you, who the starting lineups were. And I could sometimes go several deep on the benches for a number of those years, a number of different teams. It's just little facts that go into your head because you develop an obsession.
Right.
And when I did this with politics, so there are some of these facts I can tell you, but I also did it with my friends at the time. I obsessed over, every thing that happened and everything everybody screwed up and everything that went wrong. I could tell you about all the stuff everybody wanted to forget.
Well, this podcast is helping me remember things. Just going back over stuff like this map and thinking about what life was like during that time. How often do I do that? Like never. And then also I just completely forgot something that was a really big deal back then. And Brian Walsh here in the live chat, he reminded me, he said, so he brought this up a little while ago when I was saying the stuff about the Patriot Act, right? It's not just that Obama didn't repeal the Patriot Act, which, by the way, I'm pretty sure that made it so that they could detain anybody, or no. It was so they could look through anybody's personal stuff without warrant if they had any reason to suspect that you were a terrorist, right? Is that right?
Also the terrorism charge through
Right.
the Patriot Act and then through duplicate legislation at the level of the state governments, they can go after you for terrorism.
Right.
And going after you for terrorism specifically is a different kind of offense. This came up recently in relation to Luigi Mangione, who's being charged as a terrorist.
Oh, well, I'll let me just say before we bring that up, just the Brian Walsh addition is just the NDAA 1021B, indefinite detention of U.S. citizens. When Obama signed that really pissed me off. That's what I was trying to say. But okay, now this
because under authoritarian Roman emperors, you could still say civis Romanus sum and expect to be treated in accordance with Roman law. And given the set of legal rights that a Roman citizen was entitled to.
And you're saying this
citizenship has really lost a lot of its meaning in the United States in recent years. It's one of the sadder things. It's in part because people don't want to defend it because they think it excludes people who live in other parts of the world. So there's been this abandoning of the concept of citizenship, and therefore the rights that are tied to it have become a low priority for many people in the academy and in many different elite institutions. And I do think it's an incredibly sad thing and something that we should talk more about, the concept of citizenship and its value and import.
That'd be a good follow-up off of our last episode. What is society?
Yeah. What about what's the civil?
Yeah. What's the
civil? And also
civil?
to distinguish that from the political, because politics is a very broad thing. You can have politics in lots of different domains, but the civil is a quite specific thing.
Yeah. The loss of the civic is, I think, maybe one of my bigger immediate concerns also. But with that said.
Yeah. Both of those tied to Kiwis, to the concept of citizenship, civic and civil, all of that is related to the Roman notion of citizenship. So when you say this is civic or this is civil, you're saying this in some way reminds me of how a citizen is meant to treat another citizen or is meant to act. There's an appeal to a shared understanding of how a citizen is meant to behave, which comes down to us from Roman thought. But we've completely abandoned this, so we have no shared understanding. And so instead, when people tell you to be civil, it just sounds like they're making some kind of arbitrary normative command that is grounded on nothing, based on nothing, and is just being used to bully you. And that's why people go make fun of the idea that they should be civil. It doesn't seem to them to be attached to anything because they've completely forgotten what that term is actually attached to, which is their status as a citizen of the United States, who ought to care about other citizens on the basis of this shared status, and therefore ought to treat them in a particular way. This has been completely lost. And it's been lost by everybody. And it's been lost even by people who say they care about citizenship, because they've lost that. If we don't have society, if we don't have social relations, how can we even begin to grasp what it means to be civil? Because being civil goes far beyond being socialized or sociable. It's a much higher standard of treatment for people. Your fellow citizen is someone that you're supposed to care about for their own sake because they're part of a common world with you. This is not just someone you make a deal with or you trade goods with. This is somebody who's part of your shared public thing, your res publica, the thing that you share that is the thing that belongs to everybody. And through that thing, that person, even if you know nothing about them, even if they're strange to you, becomes an object of love and affection. And not on the basis of blood, not on the basis of ethnicity, on the basis of political status, of being a citizen of the same res publica. This has been completely lost. Even people who talk about republicanism in the literature, they don't emphasize the civil. And it's in part because they don't emphasize it that they struggle to differentiate themselves so much from liberals. Because liberals pretend they care about civil rights, but they don't care about the civil. They don't even care about the notion of the citizen. So how can they care about civil rights? What do civil rights mean outside of the concept of the citizen? Anyway, I could do a whole episode on that.
we don't know. Like, yeah, there's a whole thing I'll want to go into when we do, from Bernays' propaganda, where he's describing the average citizen. And it's, from the 1930s. The average citizen was involved in a lot of societies, a lot of civic infrastructure that existed outside of politics, right? Like ostensibly outside of politics. And a lot of that was organized by women, right? Women had a lot of power in these civic networks, and those have been absolutely gutted. So we go from the civic man to Joe Sixpack and I use that term because, it's used by Chomsky in manufacturing consent. So you go from the civic man to Joe Sixpack in less than 100 years. And of course, where do we go from Joe Sixpack? We go to now, which is TikTok and Amazon. And I have agoraphobia. I don't go outside. I can't even look my cashier in the eyes anymore,
Yeah. Your cashier, it's not even that people struggle to have social relations. The cashier used to be a citizen, used to be a member of your town, a member of your state, sharing a world with you, on your team. You're on their team. You might have some different interests, but you try to talk through and across those. The presumption that this is a citizen and that they're going to be civil to you, it doesn't just mean that they're going to be sociable. It means they're going to care about you. It means they're going to want your good on the basis of this shared status. Nobody presumes this anymore. It's part of why we don't have a high trust society, because we have no civility. And it does matter. The loss of civility is important, even though people make fun of people who talk about it.
Yep.
It does matter.
Yep. Yeah. No, I got made fun of for being a part of a civic responsibility and, discourse research unit at Boise State. It was like a thing I did as some kind of a fellowship during my master's. And it's because somebody I knew got a big grant to do something that would facilitate research into civic discourse or whatever, because of all of the fears around free speech and all that. And it was first of all, it was a job, but it was a job I picked up because I was like, yeah, I think this is interesting. I think this is a real problem. And I do think it's a real problem. And then people are like, oh, that's a liberal thing. Yeah, it's called a civilization thing. If you don't care about civilization, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, what is civilization? It's the process of making civil, of making us civil, of making it so that we can be civil to each other. It's making us into citizens who share a common world. That's what civilization is. It's not, a bunch of separate, distinct civilizations. No, it's the process of civilizing the world, of making all of the world into a common thing where we can all be civil with each other, where we all recognize each other as having intrinsic value. That's what civilization is. It's now been turned into this nasty word that's associated with nationalism and exclusionary stuff. That's not what it is. And yes, when the liberals bring it up, they just make a moral injunction out of it. They just scold people and shame people for their tone. And this is why people get annoyed with it. The problem is that they don't think about what are the actual conditions of possibility for civility and for civil behavior. What kind of actual structure, what kind of actual economy, what kind of actual built environment, life world would we need to be able to view each other this way and to treat each other in this way? And it's because they don't do that and they just turn it into a moral injunction that they prattle about, that they come across as so fundamentally dishonest. It's in part, I think, because there is some memory that this does matter, that people find it so annoying when the liberals just yell, be civil at them, which is itself not civil. To look at your fellow citizen who's suffering and therefore struggling to be civil, who doesn't have the conditions for citizenship, which used to, by the way, be explicitly discussed. It used to be explicitly discussed that to be a good citizen, you needed certain prerequisites. Aristotle emphasizes this point of excluding enormous numbers of people from the citizenship on the basis that they don't have the prerequisites. But even if you don't take that kind of position, it used to be discussed that to be a good citizen, to be able to do it well, you did need certain things. And if you were given citizenship only legally, But without all of these concrete things that make it possible to actualize that, then it becomes fictive. It's not a real citizenship. And you can't expect civil behavior from people who have not been given the actual conditions. And this is why the large number of citizens without property in Rome was a problem. Crunched into the city of Rome looking for employment. That was the crisis of the late Roman Republic. You have citizens who don't have the conditions necessary to do it well. How do you solve that problem? And when we create a condition in which many of our citizens don't have the capacity to actualize the citizenship effectively, to be civil to each other, to act as citizens, or to view others that they meet as citizens, that's a major frickin' problem.
Yeah.
And it's not just a problem of tone policing. It's a problem of how the whole frickin' structure works. It's a problem of you meet someone and you don't look at them as sharing a status with you. That means that you're committed to something in common. And you might have different views about how to help that thing thrive or flourish. You might have some different interests that sometimes put you at odds, but you at least are talking about the same thing. What a res publica does is it gives you a public thing, a thing in common, the good of which you can be talking about. That's the common good. The common good is that thing. And if you don't have that thing in common, then it becomes very difficult to even talk about the good or to make sense of it or to apply it to anything. And then you have a whole conversation that just becomes about what people want and what they want for them. And people become focused on blood ties and ethnicity and tribe and what they think of as nationality, or they become focused on their family and their friends and their close groups. And you get these ordo amoris arguments that miss the relevant process. This is why I wrote that Substack post a little bit. After we gave that talk the other day to the students at Boise State, I was thinking about, like let's formalize this a little bit, because I do think it's just been lost. And I hear people raise the concept of society, or they raise the concept of citizenship all the time, but they don't embed it in a theory which allows you to make sense of why is it sometimes possible for some people to do some of these things, but not all of them. How do you actually get a person to a point where they can act this way? And to recognize part of the trouble is you give citizenship to everybody, regardless of their conditions or status. Then you demand that they be responsible citizens that behave a particular way. This is a really, really disingenuous thing to have done. And it inevitably produces a devaluing of the status and of the category. And therefore, all of the rights that are tied to it are thus devalued. All of the rights that we think of as coming from American citizenship. Now we claim, it's not because we are citizens of a shared polity that we have these rights. It's because we're human. This erases the actual process by which these rights were created, built, maintained, defended. They were not created, built, maintained, defended by making moral arguments about the human and insisting over and over in arguments that humans are entitled to these rights. They were constructed institutionally through the making of republics. And that is something you have to build that. You have to make that immaterial reality. You can't just make an argument that people should behave this way on the basis of humanity. That doesn't work. That isn't how we got here. People have taken all of that for granted and forgotten how we made these things. And so they don't know how to make them anew or even to sustain what we have.
Right. And so, of course, people retreat into their little folk political circle jerks, and they try to rebuild everything back the way they want it and more by prefiguring this utopian society within the circle of peers of, say, 10 to 20 people at a DSA meeting or an Occupy in Zuccotti or what have you. And the missing piece there, obviously, is the conditions of possibility, the actual civic infrastructure, the institutions, the T3 institutions that we would need for people to be civic animals once again. And this relates to the episode I just did with Ann when we were driving back from North Idaho down to Boise, talking about the difference between the coffee shop that we go to here in Boise and the coffee shop that we go to sometimes up in North Idaho. Now, it's never just one coffee shop. When I'm not working at Amazon, I'm on a laptop, right? And so I've gotten pretty accustomed to knowing the hours of a lot of different coffee shops, and sometimes a certain coffee shop won't work for what I need to do, and so I go to a different one. And so I've got a bunch of ones that I know about here in Boise. In fact, I can have great conversations with hipsters and college students and people like that just about the coffee shop scene here in Boise. And the one that we named accidentally, we didn't mean to dox them, but we named the one that we go to, it's called Push and Pour. And look, like as far as coffee shops go, it's actually probably the best one. They've got drip coffee refills. That's a good sign. They've got outlets. They've got Wi-Fi. They've got many different seating arrangements, different size tables and chairs. Those are all things that I require. You know, you can't just have one kind of table and chair. That doesn't work. You can't have tables and chairs everywhere, but no outlets. That doesn't work. There's a lot of things that go into making it work. And one of the things that really works about this place is like, they've kind of created a little society between that place and then the hamburger shop, which is a little bougie and expensive for me. And then they got this little ice cream shop, and the three of them are all kind of like sharing this courtyard. And then they've got the roof thing from an old car wash still up and over everything. So like outside, if it's raining, you can still stand out there, and they've got like these fires going, and I love all of it. So it's kind of like, you know, some sort of infrastructure, obviously not the kind of conditions of possibility we're talking about, but the people, man, the people, they don't look at you. They don't acknowledge you. It's actually wild. Like, well, it's different in the hamburger place. Like the manager likes us. But no, in this coffee shop, you go in there and they don't do the basic thing, which is like this, like or like a, hey, like, oh, hey, you know, I don't like the word recognition here. It's the basic acknowledgement that I've seen you before. There is a thing that humans used to do, which is the acknowledgement that they recognize your face. And of course, for baristas, you know, the stereotypical barista knows your usual drink order. You know, they, of course, like in the more idealized form of this, they also know your name and some things about you. Like Mikey still has baristas like that in his life, even though the coffee shop scene in Raytown has really gone downhill. They'll at least know what he drinks, and, you know, they know that he writes books, you know. Where here, not only have we been going there for a year and a half and they don't even know anything about us, but we don't even get like the acknowledgement. And it's not just us. It's everybody, because we can see it. Like they kind of, they're all like 20-year-olds who've like clicked up, and they talk amongst themselves, and you come in, and then they'll kind of pull away from their clique and kind of come over and just do the thing that they got to do. And then they kind of stand around, and it's like, what is this, man? And then college students now yawning, because I teach these afternoon classes. I totally understand yawning in the afternoon. I get really yawny as well, but they don't stifle their yawns. Like, this is one of those bare minimal things. Like when you yawn, and I say this for the good of everybody who's here, folks, nobody wants to see the back of your throat. Like nobody wants to see it. But like, it's supposed to be one of those basic signs of like respect. It seems like these things are falling away. And sure, maybe the etiquette will change. Maybe we'll have new norms. But I think covering, or at least making an attempt to stifle your yawn, or at least go, or like some kind of acknowledgement when you recognize a person. If you don't do those things, I think that there's a primitive or primordial kind of level to us where we are put into alert mode. Like, is something wrong? Like if you see someone walking towards you at nighttime and you like nod at them and they don't nod back, it's not just natural. It's like you actually should probably be wondering, like, okay, do I need to do something here maybe? Right? Like you announce yourself to somebody.
People are scared. And then the things they do because they're scared cause other people to also feel scared, right? If the kid is too scared to nod at you, then you wonder, does he not view you as someone who ought to be nodded at?
Yeah.
And why wouldn't he view you as someone who ought to be nodded at? And is there a level of estrangement here that I didn't think there was? And it's still the case in some places in the States that there will be this norm of people waving and saying hello and doing these pleasantries when they see other people who look like they belong to wherever it is that they're from. But it's a small little symptom of
North Idaho's
an increasing climate of everyday fear. You know, it used to be that people would be scared of, you know, the stuff that they heard about on TV, the places they heard about on TV, but in their own communities, they would still be friendly and they'd treat each other, you know, with some level of trust and with some level of respect. And part of what's happening now is that we're reaching a point where it's even getting into, you know, your regular coffee shop. It's even getting into the places where, you know, in the past, it still would have been there. Even if people were worried about the news, even if people were stressed out about the inner cities 30 or 40 years ago, it would still be the case that in their own community, they would trust people. And now, you know, people are afraid to go outside and to talk to people that they encounter.
Yeah, North Idaho still has a lot of that, you know, you nod when you acknowledge, you know, and comparing her coffee shop experience, like this guy remembered her from a year and a half ago. He remembered that she's married to me. He remembered that we're moving up there. He remembered that we were working on books, like all of this from a year and a half ago. And I was like, wow. But there's rural norms and there's urban norms. And I've often just thought that a lot of this was due to my culture shock moving to a city from a smaller town, right? You go to Boise and it's different than North Idaho College. You know, Boise State, at North Idaho College, I walk across campus and if someone like looks at you and you see them and you kind of acknowledge that you saw them just as like a thing, it makes people feel a little bit more at ease. But then you come here, people don't do that. At Boise State, right? 40% of the Boise State population is from SoCal, I'm pretty sure. I don't think people are very naughty in SoCal. But, you know, okay, that's fine, though, if that's just a difference between more rural and more urban. But what we're talking about here with this coffee shop thing is like seemingly a more recent thing. And you got to think those 20-year-olds, they were told to socially distance during COVID. And they weren't in school for a couple of years. And the overwhelming majority of people, when they get talking about what Zoom classes were like, it wasn't good, man. A lot of them were playing video games. They weren't like they would they'd turn off their cameras and they could just play video games. Like there was no school is kind of what that is. But not just no school. It's like the worst kind of anti-socialization that they all went through. So it's like, it's
because
really
they were
bad.
playing video games. So presumably there was some level of interaction in the games, and that may not have been entirely helpful. Yeah, and, you know, it may sound like small stuff, but if people can't do these little things, you think they're going to help you get healthcare? You think they're going to help you pay for school, get rid of your debt? They're going to help you get a house? If they are not looking at you like you're one of them, how are they looking at you? As an NPC that isn't important in their game? That's not civil behavior. It's not even sociable.
It makes me think we got all these people with these anti-social social club shirts. I don't actually know what the origin of that is, but I've seen it around, anti-social social club. And it just makes me think of like, maybe we need a pro-civic social club, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need so many things. We need so many things. You know, like we need a whole different system in so many ways. And people don't even know where to begin.
Yeah, so bringing it back around, imaginary Democrats listening to this, folks, I mean, I understand we kind of went off the rails at some point. We got into this thing because Benjamin said we could do a whole episode on this, and we kind of sort of did, but I just want to say this is where we're coming from. This is what we're thinking about. We're thinking about the need for a shared object to bring people together again and a real way forward. And the point is we can't nostalgize Obama like he was America at its best. All right. That's the main point. And yeah, it's really easy maybe these days with whatever media you're consuming that means the sky is falling. But from my perspective of mainly going off of the behavioristic patterns of people who watch a lot of TV without watching it myself, this kind of spiraling is a recurrent thing. And I think you all just forget that I've seen it. We've all seen it over and over and over and over again. And there's a little bit of crying wolf, I think, maybe going on here. And so,
yeah, everybody forgets that the previous things that they freaked out about didn't materialize in the ways that they said that they would. Everybody forgets about that. Because the television people are saying it. And if you picked up it when you were a kid that the television people were trustworthy, it's a powerful force in your life. No matter how many times they abuse it, deliberately or by accident.
On that note, folks, we're going to close this thing out. Thanks for being such a great live stream. To the person who said, "Where's the TU Discord? I love this chat so much." Yeah, we love it too, but our Discord does not have much going on it because most of the people at TU are working and writing and reading. But there is a channel where you can share some things from time to time. And there's definitely a public forum. That's the best place to post stuff because then people can have their sort of contained conversations within the posts on that forum. Eventually, it'll be replaced by our own forums on our website. But for the time being, we are using the Discord as a sort of necessary evil. And if you do want to get involved for that reason, or because we have a bunch of awesome courses and seminars and stuff like that going on, well, then the best way is to become a subscriber. That's I don't know how to put it except that, look, this is not a society. There's no civic infrastructure. And at the end of the day, a lot of people want to be a part of something, but a lot of people don't have what it takes. And part of what it takes is organizing abilities. Part of what it takes is people like Benjamin and Mikey being free to be able to focus on this kind of work. And for the time being, that does require money. And so we're going to run an ad. It's a commercial that I made, but I made it with the help of Benjamin and co. So thanks, Benjamin. This has been a delight. Thanks, everybody. Catch y'all on the flip side. Peace.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Theory Underground exists to cultivate the conditions necessary for a working class intellectual renaissance that goes beyond old political categories or other identitarian niches. At TU, autodidact workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing institutions or movements are able to challenge their doxa and develop an understanding of the situation we are in.
If you subscribe at theoryunderground.com, you'll get access to a package of courses, including my Intro to Fault Line Theory, which includes Intro to Nick Land and Intro to Slavoj Žižek. These courses are being woven with the 3 courses that take place on a month-to-month basis, spread out throughout the year of 2025. Those courses are 12 Core Concepts and the Fundamental Problems with the Situation Today with social theorist David McCarricker, 12 Essential Political Thinkers with political theorist Benjamin Studebaker, and The Philosophy of Nature with philosopher Nina Power.
The way these all get woven together at a deeper and more meta level is through the ongoing research seminars led by David McCarricker, Benjamin Studebaker, and Michael Downs, where they engage with one another's work by sharing developments from their own perspectives, theory, and research.
If you subscribe at higher levels and support our work, we'll support your development with bespoke teaching. Alone and unaided, we struggle to grasp our situation in its fullness and formulate a meaningful response. By working together and pooling our energies, we can do better. Join us at theoryunderground.com/subscribe.
There'll be two kinds of people in 10 years. Those who said, I knew all along Theory Underground was going to make this huge difference. Those are the people that are like Nance, who were on the sidelines at one point and then said, nah, I'm going to get in. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to go hard. And then there's another kind of person, a person who waits in the wings, collects receipts, and who will say in 10 years, oh yeah, I was there. I saw that happen. And then they'll gossip monger. Listen, if you want to get involved, get involved. But if you're going to sit there in the bleachers, well, here's some popcorn. I hope you have fun.